say goodbye to me tonight, there will still be music left to write. Oh my god, I can't sing. Your post wasn't boosted. Of course my post wasn't boosted at Facebook because I don't want to pay your advertising prices. Is that so hard to understand? I'm sorry, it's frustrating. We were already started, and this is one of the things. If you're a small business on Facebook, you are constantly just fighting this battle. Either way, sup kids, how are you doing today? I'm doing well. I've slept. Well, I've slept, which is always a bonus. But no, I slept about 12 hours last night. Something ridiculous. It was unbroken. I did, of course, do the thing where I wake up in the middle of the night, get dressed, and then go back to bed. But that's a whole other podcast. That's a whole other discussion. But what we thought today, I want to discuss something which kind of came out of recent events of things which I've done. So you may notice that this podcast, once again, is late, and the reason why it's late will become clear in about 2 seconds. I made a calendar, and that calendar is available for pre-order, and the work I've put into that calendar is taken away from the work I've done for the podcast, and because of, full-time job and all that kind of thing. So I'm kind of in a situation where releasing this calendar, available for pre-order, Yellingatconcrete.com, link in bio. But what, when you make a piece of work, the worst segue ever. So when you make a piece of work, you obviously you sit and consider that piece of work. And this is the third calendar which I have made in the series of calendars. This is the 2019 calendar, which means I started doing this in 2017. I didn't start doing this in 2017. I did start a podcast. Okay, that's a bad example. I started doing art a long time ago, but I started making these calendars in 2017. And they were a reaction. They were a reaction to my social situation and my life and the people around me. And initially I wasn't going to give it to everybody. I was just going to make it for myself. And then a few friends asked what I was doing, and I said, I'm making this calendar. If you don't know, the calendar I make is... I don't think I have an example kicking about here. No, I do not. Okay, so the calendar I make is full of images of animals. And it's kind of a reaction as well to the world at large. And these calendars which you buy every single year with cute animals on them and motivational phrases and all the things which are pretty and nice within the world. And you slap them on a calendar and go, I'm going to look at that every single month and I'm going to feel better about the month I've just had. Now, I don't find that motivational in the same way that when people give me a compliment, I find it very hard to take that compliment. So I needed something for me. I needed something which would actually speak to me as a person. So I made this calendar. And these animals in my calendar aren't particularly happy. They don't look desperate. They don't look sad. But they look a bit meh. There's a sense of ennui to the whole situation. And then I couple that with phrases, which... This is what I'm getting to. So I couple it with phrases which I find motivational, but other people don't necessarily find motivational. A couple of examples I can give you. I'm just going to look one up right now from previous calendars. This comes from last year's calendar. So in May, I had a picture of a giraffe, and the giraffe was on their phone at night, and it was 5 a.m. and doesn't look particularly well rested. And the tagline for May was, "Today is already ruined." The tagline for March was, "You aren't paid to have dreams," and it features a ram working in a coffee shop. The tagline for February was, "February, you are replaceable." So you see, a lot of what I did was kind of, and what I do, the new calendar is much along the same lines. It's a little more, I wouldn't say a little more tongue-in-cheek. It's a little more personable. I've tried to go down less of a corporate slogan line to more of a colloquial phrase. But at the same time, I'll give you an example. I'll give you a sneak peek for listening to this podcast. Okay, so one of the months. So January. We'll go January. We'll go straight for January. You won't be able to see it, but it's popping up on the screen. So No, January's too good. See, this is the fine line. This is why I mentioned Facebook at the beginning. This is the fine line I'm walking to figure out how much to reveal to you and how much to keep from you. Okay, we'll go July. So July slogan was success. It's not really for you, is it? Now, I know what you may be thinking. You may be thinking, Graham, why would you ever want any of these on these calendars? Why would anyone want to buy a calendar which essentially just insults them month by month, coupled with a depressed-looking animal? Why would I want to do that? One, I'm a glutton for punishment. Okay. I kind of hate myself, and that's good. That's good for me. Not good for everybody. Some people can't handle that. I kind of hate myself, and that motivates me. So when I read each one of these months, I get a sense of motivation. I read it and I go, well, fuck you, calendar. You know, here's all the things I did this month. Here's all, you can see the things I've done this month because I've used the calendar. I've written on the calendar to say the things which I've done. So there's a sense of resistance to it, and it reminds me, it keeps me humble in a way, and it reminds me that not everyone's doing as well, and it also keeps me humble to the sense of, if I do have a month where I don't do much, the calendar reminds me of that, and we roll on. But why do I mention this? Well, one, to promote it and make you buy my calendar. That's pretty obvious. But two, it raises a critical subject which comes into my work surprisingly a lot. And what I was doing, I was considering these things and considering these slogans. And when I write these slogans, I have to be very careful, because I don't want to be construed as promoting depression or motivating someone to do something drastic, essentially. I mean, there was someone mentioned to me, who was it? I can't remember who it was, but I was discussing the calendar with them, and they wanted to suggest a line, and they said, "Oh, you failed. Why don't you just kill yourself?" And that's not right. That doesn't suit the calendar. And why doesn't it suit the calendar? It doesn't suit the calendar because, one, it's not funny. It's basically just an instruction. Two, it doesn't really fit the calendar's kind of tongue-in-cheek mentality. And three, it might motivate someone to do something drastic. It would be like having a person in your room which was basically just telling you to hurt yourself every single day, and that's not what this is for. But at the same time, I understand that not a lot of people will appreciate this, because it's not for everyone. It's definitely not for everyone. I completely understand that, which is why I don't expect to sell millions of calendars. I just expect to appeal to the breadth of the audience who do think the same as me and need something like this and enjoy something like this and find something. But I'm getting off point, as always. The reason I was saying, oh Jesus, that's my alarm. Okay, so the reason, it's like 3 p.m. So the reason I kind of brought this up was it always triggers the same argument in my head of where you stand on the line of something which is informative, constructive, and has a theory behind it, and something which is seen as funny or lighthearted or damaging. There's a wide range of breadth when you pick your theme. Put work out there, you are saying a message, and that message is part of you and won't be interpreted the same by the entire audience. You always have to think about that. And whilst I find these things funny, some people don't. So when I think of that, and I think of the people who won't find it funny and won't find it motivational, I have to make sure that those people would also not find it damaging. And it's a very fine line to walk, and I think I walk it okay. I think I do. If I don't, apologies, never intended any harm. This calendar's obviously not for you. It's not intended for you. But obviously you can't market directly to people who just have a sense of self-loathing. But this is a topic I wanted to discuss for a while, because there's this whole theory, and it tracks back really far, the fact that how we as a society use humour. So we're the only creatures we know of that use humour with language, humour with things like puns and concept and theology and all these kinds of things. And we take humour, and it's a very human invention. It's right there at the thing. It requires cognitive thought. You can get humour, you can not get humour, and much like art, is subjective and not subjective. So there's this whole real balance which you kind of walking and treading when you use humour all the time. And humour can be just as light as anything. Can be a sense of complete novelty. But at the same time, there's humour which can be extremely dark, but it can still be funny. And I'm going to be careful here as well, because I don't want to be promoting the wrong kind of humour. So the first instance of this which jumps to mind when I think of it is the whole idea of propaganda. So to me, humour has always been this double-edged sword where there is no kind of black and white with humour. There's a lot of grey area to humour. And the first time I realised that humour could be used is kind of like a tool instead of just something which is between you, your friends, and your family, was within propaganda. So you study World War II, and you study all the kind of different conflicts during school, and you get to see these propaganda, and you think about these propaganda, and you're thinking, why was humour being used this way? And at that time, humour was a tool to disarm something which was terrifying. It was used to kind of annoy and frustrate the enemy. You know, if you think of the German army as ridiculous and silly and something which is not to be taken seriously, then you don't necessarily have to think about the conflict which is happening. And it helps. It helps people who have sent their children off to war to think of it as, oh, you know, it's just a laugh to do with this, so they don't think about their child suffering. And that is a great tool. It's a coping mechanism, completely a coping mechanism, which we've used to just combat this sense of impending fear. And humanity uses it all the time. We do it all the time. And this is, I mean, you know, even my calendar, take a very serious subject like depression and suicide and all this kind of stuff, and I throw humour at it because it weakens the impending edge of what is there. And propaganda is one of these clear examples. But with that comes the other side of it. So you have propaganda, but when you look back through time, you can go back even further, humour has also been used for racism and sexism. And it's still used for racism and sexism. And it has a continuous effect. It's one of these things of which kind of sits, and there's all the discussion goes on right now. I think there was an episode of... an episode of Top Gear, I think, where they'd made a joke about another country, and the country had asked that joke to be retracted and apologised, and they refused to apologise because part of British culture is insulting other cultures, because we fully expect to be insulted, and of course there's always a conflict there of one culture and how one culture reacts to another culture, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to get into that now. But what humour essentially does is allow you a bit of freedom. So when you're the subject of the joke, it's also very damaging. I think that makes sense. So, I guess in the way that I don't really have a question. So I guess the question / thought here is at what point is the balance? You know, where are you sitting on it? Where does it go past making fun of something or weakening a target and become focused on a target? So a huge conversation happening right now. Obviously women's rights. That's a huge thing. Huge movement going on right now within my own city. There's plenty going on to support and encourage women, and that's fantastic. So obviously there's always going to be jokes. So what are the jokes at the expense of? So feminism at the moment is strong, getting stronger, fantastic. And there's a careful line which they're having to walk. And I've had this discussion with feminist friends of mine. Of they worry about walking this line because they don't want to be misconstrued, essentially, in the same way that I don't want to be misconstrued. Is that you've kind of got this thing. So you have your passion, your subject, and what you want to get across to the people, and you've got to make sure that when you do that, it doesn't turn and become more of a targeted assault. You can lift something up on one side without pushing something else down. But of course, there's always going to be things because we're human. This is the thing, you know. Things. So as within feminists, This is a really weird way to word it. Okay, so within feminism, you've got kind of got this branch where it's like, right, so we're rising women up and everything's going on. So you need to weaken the enemy, so to speak, which is patriarchy. So making jokes about patriarchy, and that's the way to do it, because what it does is it humanizes the target. It also makes them weaker in the eyes of the people who are trying to be risen up. So with the same word can be said within racism, with making fun of racists weakens racists, because it means they're taken less seriously. They become the butt of the joke. Itching my head. And that can work double way around. For racists make jokes about ethnicity because they want to make the person who is being made fun of feel like less of a person. And there's this kind of twist which you are always kind of walking, where you're really having to think whether you're encouraging bad behavior by normalizing things and making things like jokes about ethnicity and feminist issues and gender, or whether you're doing what you initially intended, which is kind of trying to weaken an overall target. And I think within social issues, the balance there comes where once that movement has succeeded and that movement becomes the normality. So, for instance, like with racism, it started initially as a way of demeaning a race within print media and society, and then became a way of weakening a target, whilst you had kind of equality kind of resurging and whatnot. And by the way, I'm not saying they won completely. There is still a huge amount of racism. We're just going to slide that in there. But it kind of got to a point where that's, that within our society, people of different colours and races and all this kind of thing are standard. That's society, and that's the way it should be, in my opinion. But that's the standard thing. So now they've gotten past that point. So the side which was using humour as racism is now just racism, and it can be said exactly the same the other way around. But it's a complex subject. So essentially, when I approach humour and when I think about it, I always think of it as, where are we in that argument? So whilst I was very young and angsty, and now I'm just old and angsty, I experienced the Iraq War. The Iraq War was a huge thing when I was a teenager, and all I did was take pot shots at Tony Blair. That's because he's the easiest, biggest target in the fucking world. That's what I did as a teenager, because that made sense. He was a target. He was the enemy. He was something which I hated and wanted to destroy. And so, humour about it. Easiest way to do it. He's less scary if he's humour. He's less scary if I make a joke about him. It's less terrifying that politics was the way it was. And, it's the same way nowadays. People take pot shots at Corbyn and they take pot shots at May. And it's because they're trying to weaken one another. They're trying to make each other seem less intrusive within their lives by making light of them. And there became a point where I was doing this and, Tony Blair was no longer in power. We'd moved on. There was a new prime minister. I had a new target. Did I start making jokes about Tony Blair? No, I did not. And that was wrong. That was the point where I should have stopped. Because that was suddenly the normality. The normality was that Tony Blair was a bad person. Still is a bad person. You don't get rid of those things. Same way that Nixon's still a bad person. You don't get rid of the things you did in the past. Actions speak very loudly. So there's a point where I'm beating a dead horse. It became normality. It became very easy. It's like ham-fisted lines about terrorism. Terrorism is a normality within our world because it happens so often and there's so many people who are engaging in it. So making jokes about it just doesn't have an effect anymore. And trying to figure that out and trying to be mindful of that is very hard, especially within the kind of culture and groups you spend. As I say, I was a teenager. I didn't know shit. I still don't know shit, but I didn't know shit as a teenager. And that group you hang around with, they don't know shit. So everybody's doing it. Everybody's just kind of getting involved and getting on board until one of you just suddenly stops and goes, this isn't funny anymore. It's not funny because it's the normality. It's got the messages out there. Everybody knows it. Blah, 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 blah. Warmonger, blah, 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 blah. Terrorist, blah, 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 blah. Basically just sat on the lap of Bush for the entire thing. That becomes the normality, and it's not funny anymore. And I find that incredibly interesting. I always find it interesting when people say you can't make jokes about things. And to me, personally, you can make jokes about anything, but it has to be funny. You know, humor helps people deal with things. Humor helps people deal with terrifying subjects. It really does. You know, if you were feeling incredibly depressed and you were feeling suicidal, jokes about suicide can help because it takes the edge off. It absolutely just sits there and goes, you know what, here's this huge, terrifying thing which is looming over my head. And suddenly, you know what, it's not that scary anymore because we just made a joke about it. You know, it makes it silly. It makes it trivial. And I can completely understand from the other side, if you have lost someone to suicide, then that joke seems like an insult to the person you lost. And that is the balance, and that is knowing your audience, and that is knowing who you are appealing to. And this is the whole point I kind of make, or try to make, with my calendar, is I know my calendar's not for everybody. I'm aware that producing it opens me up to all kinds of conflict within society, because some people will look at my calendar and go, this is an insult to anybody who is struggling, and some people will look at my calendar and go, no, this really helps because I can relate to it, and it makes it less fearful. It makes me less fearful of the situation at hand. So the question, I guess, is to me and to everybody out there when you make work is how much is it worth upsetting those few people to help the larger group? And if it's the other way around, if you're going to upset more people than you're actually going to help, is it worth it? And that's a real question. That's a strong question. I'll give you a hypothetical example. If you've got a group of people who are subjugated and feeling like they're not being heard, and the only way to help those people will be to upset the majority, should you still do it? That's a real question. I kind of want to know what you guys think. I mean, my view for next year is, in 2019, on my calendar, is to do more artwork. And a lot of my artwork pokes the bear, so to speak. You know, it's not meant to be liked by everybody. If anything, it's meant to annoy you. That's the goal of a lot of my work, is simply just to get your attention and to make you think. And if the way I make you think is by upsetting you, then that's what I'm going to do. So, yeah. It's all very interesting. And I can't talk about it fully extending, I guess. Maybe I should interview comedians. Figure out what they want to do. But what do you guys think? Is there a limit on humour? I genuinely don't think there is. I think you have to be, in the same way that you have to be able to talk about everything, you have to be able to make jokes about anything. Because it helps so many people cope, and it outweighs the upset. I'll talk to you guys.